4 du Comité permanent de l'accès de l'information, de la protection des renseignements.
Welcome to our Ethics Committee meeting.
1083H, briefing on annual reports and other reports of the Information, Lobbying, and Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioners. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefits of the witnesses and members. Please wait until you're recognized by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. Although this room is equipped with a powerful audio system, feedback events can occur, and these can be extremely harmful to our interpreters and cause serious injuries. And the most common cause of sound feedback is an earpiece that's worn too close to a microphone. So we therefore ask all participants to exercise a high degree of caution when handling the earpieces, especially when your microphone or your neighbor's microphone is turned on. In order to prevent incidents and safeguard the hearing health of our interpreters, I invite participants to ensure that they speak into the microphone into their headset and is plugged in, and to avoid manipulating the earbuds by placing them on a table away from the microphone when they are not in use. Je vous rappelle que toutes les observations des députés.
I remind you that all comments must be made through the chair.
And I would also say, in accordance with the committee's routine motion concerning connection tests, I am aware that everyone appearing in person, the connection tests have happened. Mr. Green, I believe, is
with us. His video is off.
Okay,
With us.
wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Green. Now I'd like to welcome our witnesses for the first hour for today. From the Office of the Commissioner of Lobbying, I want to welcome Nancy Belanger, the Commissioner of Lobbying, and from the Office of the Information Commissioner of Canada, Caroline Maynard, Information Commissioner. And I thank you both for your patience. And we're starting this meeting an hour later than scheduled, and I appreciate you taking the time with us this afternoon. Commissioner Belanger, you have 5 minutes for your opening statement, followed by Madame Maynard. Go ahead, please.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président et membres du...
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today on the work of the Office of the Commissioner of Lobbying, together with my colleague, the Information Commissioner. My office is a micro-organization with a broad mandate set out in the Lobbying Act, which requires that my office maintain the registry of lobbyists, offer education to increase awareness and understanding of the lobbying regime, and ensure compliance with the Act and the Lobbyist's Code of Conduct. Despite the small size of our organization, we also have the same extensive reporting requirements as all other federal departments. We delivered on our mandate with a small number of employees, which averaged 28 staffed positions last fiscal year, and with a budget of $5.2 million. The number of registrations and registered lobbyists continues to grow each year, and 2022-2023 was no exception, with as many as 5,300 active registrations and 7,000 active lobbyists at any given time. The same is true for oral and arranged communication reports filed in the Registry of Lobbyists, which once again set a new record of 30,681. We enhance the registry by introducing a search alert feature which notifies users when their selected keywords are added to the registry. We continued our efforts to contribute our experience and knowledge both in Canada and internationally, with approximately 80 presentations to a variety of stakeholders. On the compliance front, in 2022-2023, I determined that no further action was required in 27 preliminary assessments. I pursued 3 investigations and made 1 referral to the RCMP. As of September 30th, we have 36 ongoing compliance files.
As you know, we also work tirelessly to update the Lobbyist Code of Conduct, that was ultimately published in the Canada Gazette in May 2023. For the first half of the current fiscal year, our efforts have been focused on ensuring that stakeholders understand the updated code, which came into force on July 1st. We are prioritizing communications with those who are currently listed in the registry to support their understanding and compliance with these updated standards. More broadly, we are developing ways to expand awareness and understanding of the lobbying regime. We will increase our products and tools while also improving our use of plain language so that we can further promote compliance. I was pleased that the office was identified in the budget 2023 to receive an ongoing increase of $400,000. This funding will allow us to hire 4 additional indeterminate staff to help alleviate some of the risks associated with depth of capacity. I am hopeful to receive these funds through the Subs-B process and proceed to staffing these positions. In the ongoing absence of review and changes to the Act, and recognizing that I have just over a year left in my mandate, I will continue to identify and pursue improvements that could enhance the transparency, fairness, clarity, and efficiency of the federal lobbying regime. These changes will include updating our interpretation materials with respect to the application and enforcement of the Act, improving the registry, and potentially seeking regulatory updates to enhance the effectiveness of lobbying registration. I would like to conclude by thanking each and every employee of the office. I am grateful for their dedication, professionalism, and excellence in delivering on our mandate. Mr. Chair, committee members, thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Merci, Madame Bélanger. On va commencer pour 5.
Madame Bélanger, you'll have 5 minutes. Thank you, Madame Bélanger. Ms. Maynard, you have 5 minutes. Thank you for inviting me to discuss the reports published by my office so far this year. I was probably among the first to read the final report of this committee's study into access of information as soon as it was made available last June. I published a statement on my website, and I was pleased to note that many of your recommendations reflected the advice of witnesses who appeared before you.
Committee once again. Now let me bring you up to speed on some of my office's activities since I had last the opportunity to appear before you. The most recent reports that I published were actually the annual reports on the administration of the Access to Information and Privacy Acts, which were tabled on October 3rd. In addition to my role of investigating complaints related to access to information requests, my office is also subject to both of these acts. I take my responsibilities in these areas very seriously, and it is reflected in my office's own ATIP performance, which includes no deemed refusals and an average response time that is lower than the 30-day limit. En juin dernier, j'ai également déposé.
Last June, I also tabled my annual report, which detailed the activities achieved by my office. And it had the results for 2022-2023. While I am proud of these results, I am very concerned about the overall state of the access to information system in Canada. I voiced my concerns in opinion pieces that ran in the Globe and Mail and Le Devoir during the Right to Know Week. In those opinion pieces, I talked about the 40-year-old Act's midlife crisis.
Governments have failed to modernize information management practices, just as they have failed to introduce amendments to the Act itself that would ensure it remained relevant and effective. I also stated that some government institutions now routinely violate this law on a daily basis, and that there is no or little indication that the government intends to act to rectify this situation. I'm hoping to be proven wrong when the government tables its response to your report, which is due, I understand, this week. 2 weeks ago, I also met with provincial and territorial counterparts in Quebec City, where we issued a joint resolution aimed at reinforcing the public's right to access government-held information, including historical records. It has never been more important for Canadians to have access to official government records if we are to maintain confidence in our democratic institutions. In our modern digital world, disinformation and misinformation spread very quickly. Timely access to accurate facts and reliable information is more critical than ever. Reconnaissant que
Recognizing that access to information systems across Canada are frequently unable to provide timely responses to access to information requests, the resolution called upon our respective governments to also make use of alternate mechanisms for providing access to records, including through proactive disclosure. We also urged our respective governments to modernize legislation, policies, and information practices. A copy of the resolution is available on my office's website. I have provided a link with the committee as well.
As the government seeks to reduce expenditures, I would like to repeat something that is crucial. Leaders must remember the access to information is both a quasi-constitutional right and a legal obligation, and it must be treated as such. I will conclude my remarks here. Thank you very much.
Madame Ménard, Madame Bélanger, on va commencer.
Thank you, Ms. Maynard and Ms. Bélanger. We're going to start with our questions. First turn, 6 minutes each. And we'll start with Mr. Gould. Mr. Gould, you have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to Ms. Bélanger and Ms. Maynard. It's always great to have you with us. My first question is for you, Ms. Bélanger. For the number of registrations of lobbyists, can you show me, or can you tell me about this increase? Answer. Last year, I think we had about 5,600 lobbyists, and now we're at 7,000. For communications, there were 24, 25, and now we're at 30. So that's oral communication. And so there has been a significant increase over the years, which is a good thing. I think it's good that lobbyists are registering. It's a good thing, but it just means we're busy. I wonder if it shows how good lobbying is going in Canada. And so for people who are subject to this, we receive a report. Public servants receive this report. We receive this report. Can you explain how it works? All organizations and lobbyists must be registered when they intend to communicate with the department on any given topic. When they have an oral communication that was arranged in advance, so not an impromptu meeting on the street. When it's planned in advance, on the 15th day following the conversation, they need to send in that they spoke with the public office holder, and they need to name the person and share what the topic was of those discussions. So that's the information that we receive. Do you remember if any public office holders were registered in these communications? Not necessarily not to their knowledge, but lobbyists have clients and they need to respond to different communications. Sometimes they just want to say hello to a lobbyist and they have to write down that there was a communication with the lobbyist and answer. The goal of the registry is that it have adequate and true information. And so lobbyists register, and if they say that there was a communication that didn't happen, well, that's technically an infraction. And I hope that people are being truthful in their registrations. there are people who will mention a letter that they sent, and that's a misunderstanding there. And so we do a verification every month, and about 5% are mistakes, and we will get the lobbyist to correct a mistake. Ms. Maynard, my question will have to do with privacy. So the new legislation, Bill 25 in Quebec, is inspired by what you do in your office. Are federal institutions subject to it? Are they exempt? For the Privacy Act, you'd have to talk to Monsieur Dufresne, who is the Privacy Commissioner. I know that they communicate a lot about privacy, and so I would invite you to speak to Mr. Philippe Dufresne. I'll do so if I can. You talked about the midlife crisis. I'm closer to a 60-year crisis here, but can you come back to certain details of that? The Access to Information Act was adopted in 1983, and so it turned 40 this July. And as the report stated, and there's been comments since, unfortunately, there wasn't much to celebrate. We were proud as Canadians, and we were one of the first countries to have legislation on access to information. And we were among the first countries. I think we were the 8th country. And now there are over 125 countries that have access to information legislation. Our legislation hasn't been modernized, and there have been many issues with the implementation. My office has received a great many complaints, and so we want to give Canadians some key examples as to why access to information is important and why the legislation needs to be modernized after 40 years. You said that it's difficult to get information in a timely manner and how that can impact Canadians. Well, if you need information for a journalist, for example, or a teacher or a person that wants information on how government decisions are made, and you receive the information a year or two later, well, that information is no longer relevant. And so, unfortunately, the timelines aren't respected. Thank you, Mr. Gould. Just for the committee's information, we invited Mr. Dufresne, but he is busy this week. But he is available next week. I think he might be with us on Monday. Thank you, Mr. Gould.
Ms. Damoff for 6 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Thank you to you both for being with us today. Ms. Belanger, I wanted to talk a little bit about sponsored travel. I've done a lot of work with Results Canada and World Vision, and I know you've heard the concerns that these organizations have expressed. I'm just wondering if you could give us a bit of a rationale as to why you've decided to do what you've done when it comes to international travel.
I used to work a long time ago in the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commission office, and sponsored travel has been a concern from that perspective for a very long time. And when I became Commissioner of Lobbying, it concerned me that lobbyists who are expected something from those people that they lobby can offer travel worth thousands of dollars and then come back and then call you to lobby you for something specific. When I, and the predecessor of the current Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner appeared before committee and suggested that all sponsored travel should be subject to an acceptability test, and I agreed with him. So from my perspective, from lobbyists, I thought, I can't put a rule that, hospitality and big lavish dinners would be prohibited, but traveling members of parliament or public servants or anyone else around the world with possibly guests, I don't think that it certainly creates a sense of obligation that in my view was not acceptable. And so at the end of the day, if it's that important for members of parliament to go on these trips, then you need the budget for it. I don't think it's fair. It's also, leveling the playing field. I've had representations of concerns of those who have offered, but I've also received representations of those who've said, we've never been able to offer that because we don't have the budget, and this was a good call and a good decision.
So I guess, as an MP, I've been able to use my member's office budget to visit a uranium mine, for example. I've been to Six Nations Reserve, which is not too far from my community, but I've also just this summer went to Okomochi Healing Lodge in Saskatchewan. Those trips have greatly enhanced my ability to, educated me as a member of parliament. I've also done trips with Results and World Vision. They're far from lavish. I think there's this perception. I'm not talking about the Porterhouse Steaks and Chateaubriand that I know some sponsored travel are. This was economy travel. This was not staying in lavish hotels at all. They were educational. So how do you... and it has informed my work as an MP. I feel no obligation to those organizations, but it has informed my decision-making in the things that I've done. So how do you get that balance? We don't have a budget to travel internationally.
And I would argue that if you feel that it has enhanced your role as a member of parliament, maybe you should. I cannot, in good conscience, say it's okay for lobbyists to bring individuals that they lobby on travel. Now, some of the groups you've mentioned are likely not registered lobbyists, so let's make this very clear. I only regulate lobbyists, those that are registered and paid to lobby members of parliament. I do not regulate groups that are not registered to lobby. So there will be some travel that will be able to continue.
Travel is allowed to continue then?
Well, for those lobbyists, for groups that are not registered to lobby. Okay. I only regulate lobbyists. So if they don't meet the threshold to be registered as lobbyists, they're not subject to the code of conduct for lobbyists.
Okay. Moving on, I'm wondering, do you think that lobbying is a multi-jurisdictional issue? I know. Or should we be looking at any kind of harmonizing with the provinces in terms of lobbying rules?
Well, that's interesting. I do have groups that tell me that would be so much easier for them to be able to register in one place or at least be subject to the same rules across the country. And I do not believe that any commissioner of lobbying from across this country would be against that idea because we're all dealing with different thresholds, and it's not easy for lobbyists out there to know one place it's 10 hours, another it's 30, another we are very different. Some models are copying other models, so I do think that it would, if having a great vision, it would be wonderful, but whether or not we can get all provinces to agree and the federal to have one type of regime for lobbying, we'll see.
I think it makes it hard for organizations
Absolutely.
to know what they can do. I'm from an Ontario MP, so the rules there are far more lax than they are federally in terms of lobbying. So I think it can be hard for them to know to be able to differentiate.
I don't know that I would agree that they're more lax. They're different.
Well, if you looked what happened at the Greenbelt, I would say they're a lot more lax. So
We'll see where that goes.
okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Damoff. Monsieur Villemure, pour 6 minutes. Commencez, s'il vous plaît.
Monsieur le Président, je vous remercie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to both of you for being with us again today. We're seeing a lot of you. And thanks a lot. I'll start with you, with Ms. Bélanger. Are you satisfied with the new code? I would say yes. Somebody asked me recently if I would do something differently if I had to start again, and I said no. Up till now, we have a lot of questions, of course, because people don't want to violate the code. And what has changed? What about compliance? Well, I'm hoping that people are complying. It was only implemented 6 months ago. We've been receiving a lot of questions. Some journalists have reached out to us. Sometimes I have to communicate with people. But it did increase the workload for the office, but we were expecting that, and it's fine. You're at the middle of your mandate? I have about 14 months, so it ends in December 2024. Are there any changes to the Act that weren't made that you would like to see? Is there anything missing? The Act needs to be reviewed. There are many things missing. I'm not sure how I could repeat it, but there are a lot of gaps. A lot of lobbying is done and doesn't need to be registered. There's the lack of sanctions as well. You either go through the RCMP or a parliamentary committee. So yes, there are improvements to be made, and even lobbyists agree that there are changes to be made. The last review was in 2012, and the Act requires, and it's not a choice to revise it. It needs to be revised, and it hasn't been done. I think that all commissioners can agree with you on that. Ms. Maynard. When we talk about disinformation and misinformation, you brought this up earlier. Can you tell us a bit more? Because it is something that we find concerning. Disinformation is information that is given voluntarily, and so it has the goal of people not getting the right information. Misinformation is when people aren't receiving all of the facts. And so what we're trying to do with access to information is to fill in the gaps. Information should always be accessible as quickly as possible, voluntarily, and the government should be proactive. But if it's not the case, we want to be sure that people have access to reliable information, and that is true, and in a timely manner, so that people can make the right decisions, even for understanding history. Recently, we've seen how important it is that people have access to truthful information. We talked about cabinet secrets last time. Where are we at now? Well, things haven't changed since I last spoke to you. I still don't have access to those documents. I asked that the legislation be changed so that those documents be subject to our office, and I'm glad that you made that recommendation. I was reading a newspaper article with Ms. Wilson-Raybould and SNC-Lavalin, and the ethics commissioner was saying that that secrecy should be removed, but today we saw that the end of the story then would have been different. Well, we have a good example with a commission that had a lot of cabinet-protected documents, and they were the only documents that explained what had happened, the decisions made, the decisions that needed to be made quickly, and the sky didn't fall. People received a lot more information in the Rouleau report. So I'm not saying that information needs to be shared necessarily, but an independent commissioner should be able to state what information should be a cabinet secret, because we would trust the office. Now on declassification, do you have any suggestions beyond cabinet? That's something different, and that's for secret or top secret documents that were classified that way. What we're seeing is that there are documents that are 60, 80 years old that are still secret or top secret and shouldn't And so we are suggesting that a mandatory process be put in place so that these documents can be shared automatically so that people don't have to do an access to information request. We want the information to be made accessible more quickly, and only sensitive documents, because there will always be sensitive documents, so only those documents be protected. So would that be through the Act or through regulations? Well, the government could put in a process for reviewing these documents. Thank you, Mr. Villemur.
Let's go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And such an important line of questioning that I want to pick up from my friend from the block for Commissioner Maynard. 15% of the OIC inventory for complaints in 2022-2023 include historical cases of national security. What would a robust declassification system look like? And how often should cases be up for renewal of classification? And what would the metric to impose that renewal?
Existing mechanism out there. The UK has one, the United States have one, and Australia has one too. They're all different, and I'm not saying either of them are better, but we definitely don't have one here in Canada. So anything, whether you pick 60 years, 50 years, 80 years even, we've seen recently a case where it was a legal opinion that was 80 years old and still was not going to be released. We need a program with experts that are going to be sitting and decide what can be declassified on behalf of Canada. And I think that would help not just my office, but Canadians understanding their history.
And on that, it says that only investigators with a certain level of clearance may investigate certain cases. At what substantive level are investigators provided a higher clearance? And how quickly are staff trained and provided an opportunity to gain a higher level of clearance in order to investigate some more complex cases?
We don't have special classification for the position themselves. It's a special delegation from the minister. I have about 23 employees who have that delegation, and their clearance, it takes the normal clearance time for like the RCMP clearance for secret, and then we have only a few top secret employees. It takes sometimes 3 to 6 months.
Is that, you said only a few top secret clearance employees, is that an administrative barrier to being able to deal with some of the more complex cases that might have sensitivity or undue delay?
It's definitely difficult to have somebody who has the expertise. Imagine for my office to hire these people. I understand within the government it's difficult as well, because the same documents are being reviewed not only by my office, by the analysts in each of these institutions. But it's definitely something that if the documents were declassified at the get-go, it would help the process ultimately.
I know, certainly not pertaining to this intervention that you're here today, but I've heard the term administrative sabotage, and I certainly don't place that on your office, but it's the way in which across the whole of government or in government arm's length institutions, there is a skirting of the laws. In fact, a recent story published on October 4th, it has a headline that says, "We're ashamed. Canada's information watchdogs sign a joint pact urging governments to fix the FOI system." I'm just going to quote a couple of things, and then I'm going to invite you to respond if that's okay. The Globe's report that launched called Secret Canada reported that and revealed that public institutions skirt access laws, also known as freedom of information laws, by overusing redactions, failing to meet legislated timelines, and claiming no records, even when in fact they do exist. This is what I reference when I say administrative sabotage. The resolution that I believe you signed on to, and I'll allow you to speak to it in a moment, calls on the government to uphold 7 principles related to the public's right to know. Chief among them is the idea that the culture of public institutions must be founded on a fundamental principle that information under their control belongs to the people that they serve. I won't reference the entire article. I'm sure that you're familiar and probably have prepared to comment on it coming into this, given how close it was just a few weeks back that this story broke. So I would allow for you to address that now and maybe just provide a context for how you feel that this resolution impacts the work that you're able to do moving forward.
Yeah, like I said in my opening remarks, all the commissioners last week felt that it was a really good time now to talk about access. The Globe and Mail made a really good job in putting that on the front pages, and we are in a place where information is key. Canadians don't trust governments. We need information to be factual, timely, provided to them. We need a lot of our jurisdiction need modernized legislation. Not all of us, but many of us. We need trained analysts, trained professionals to deal with that. And ultimately, we definitely need a change of culture across the board. We need people who believe that giving information will actually make them feel better and empowered, not embarrassed and impoverished. We need government employees to feel that the leaders are behind them when they give access to information.
Well, I would share with you, I think Michael McAvoy was quoted in it, and we share a perspective, which is that, in his quotes, where there is a vacuum of information created by government withholding information, that's where conspiracy theories, that's where disinformation is going to flourish. Is that a statement that you also agree with? And do you view what has been stated as the erosion of access rights as being a threat to the institution of democracy itself?
I totally agree with Michael. Yes, we need definitely more information out there, not the people trying to figure out what the information is. And the trust, when you said earlier, when you receive a document that's redacted and later on you find out through the investigation that the information that was redacted is not top secret, it's not a legal opinion, it's not, that's when the trust goes away. Why was that redacted in the first place? Or why was the timeline missed when it's a two-pager, that you should have received in 30 days? We need to help Canadian trust our government better, and the system of information is broken. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your candor today.
Yeah, I appreciate that too, Matt, quite frankly. Thank you, Madame Ménard. We're going to go to the second round now. I've got Mr. Barrett for 5 minutes, please. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you both for being here today. Your timing is quite fortuitous. In the Toronto Star this morning, there is a story that says documents reveal why RCMP didn't pursue criminal probe of Justin Trudeau and SNC-Lavalin affair. It says the Royal Canadian Mounted Police declined to pursue a criminal investigation into Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's actions during SNC-Lavalin affair, in part because the federal police force was thwarted in a bid to get confidential cabinet materials, newly released documents show. Now, not the documents that they were seeking, just documents about the process that they used to seek them. Now, this came down to the RCMP Googling open source information, public information, to try and get the answers that they need instead of having access to the information that they were actually looking for. This, of course, is a scandal that saw the Prime Minister found guilty under the Conflict of Interest Act of using his power to interfere in the independence of the Attorney General, and that was for the purpose of helping his friends who were facing a criminal investigation, his friends at a multinational company. Now, the question that this raises, of course, is if Prime Minister Trudeau used his power to break Section 139 of the Criminal Code. And that says, everyone who willfully attempts in any manner to obstruct, pervert, or defeat the course of justice in a judicial proceeding is guilty of an offense. So, if so, it would mean that he was using his power to help a multinational company that had defrauded and bribed their way around the world amongst a host of other awful conduct. Now, this law, the Conflict of Interest Act, was broken. The question is, was the criminal code broken? And this scandal, this saga that saw Canada's first Indigenous Attorney General fired, and, of course, the then Health Minister had to follow her out the door. Now, some knowingly, some unknowingly undertook a cover-up to make sure that Canadians didn't get the answers that they needed. This is tremendously concerning for Canadians. It's still the subject of media reporting all these years later. 5 years later, people are still trying to get answers about what happened because Canadians have a desire to get the truth. And Canadians deserve that truth. So while you're here, I'd just like you to indulge me for a moment while I give notice of a motion. And that's that pursuant to Standing Order 1083H and in relation to media reports, the committee undertake a study to investigate why the RCMP did not pursue a criminal probe of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his involvement in the SNC-Lavalin affair, that the committee dedicate no less than 4 meetings to the study, that the committee invite Prime Minister Trudeau to appear before the committee for no less than 2 hours, in addition to any further witnesses that the committee may consider relevant to appear, and that the committee begin the study forthwith. So we'll send that to the clerk.
Both official languages as well, please.
Yes, absolutely.
And you've got 1 minute and 47 seconds. Go ahead.
How many orders have you issued to the government, Ms. Menard?
Last year, I issued 157 orders.
And how many were complied with?
Most of them were, I think we have now up to 9 cases that the institution decided to challenge the orders, and 1 that they ignore the order, and we had to apply for a mandamus to force them to respect the order that was issued.
And now why I would like you to explain why you have to issue orders, what the threshold is before that occurs. I don't think we have time. Which departments would you deem the serial offenders, the ones that appear most often for which you have to issue orders?
The top 5 institutions are always the one who will get the most orders because they have so many files behind. So LAC, Library and Archives, the RCMP, PCO, National Defense, and I can't remember the 5th one, but I can send you the name.
And how much time do I have left, Chair?
45 seconds.
Has the current Liberal government gone to court to prevent your orders from being carried out?
A few institutions have actually challenged the orders, most of the time because they found that the timeline that I gave them were unreasonable, so they're trying to obtain longer delays to respond to an access request.
And following the projected time that they said it would take for them to fulfill the order, do they fulfill the orders 100% of the time?
Most of the time we have to settle in court because the orders has been respected by the time we get a hearing case. So basically this system to go to court is to gain some additional time.
And do you know what cost that is to your department for you to appear in federal court?
We have our own legal counsel, but I had to increase my legal counsels by 2, at least 3 employees to respond to that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. We're going to go to Ms. Khalid next. Go ahead. 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both of our absolutely awesome witnesses for being here today. I really appreciate your input. So I'm going to pick up on something that MP Demoff had kind of talked about in more general terms, but I'll be a little bit more specific. There was reporting last month about the sponsored travel disclosure from 5 Conservative MPs who took quite a lavish trip to London based on the disclosure. The MPs on the trip were John Williamson, Stephen Ellis, Philip Lawrence, Rosemary Falk, and Shannon Stubbs. Included in their expenses were 600 bottles of champagne, porterhouse steaks, Chateaubriand, and smoked salmon.
Did you say 600 bottles of champagne?
$600 bottles. $600 bottles. My apologies. $600 bottles of champagne, porterhouse steaks, Chateaubriand, and smoked salmon, which cost over $6,200 for one night out to dinner. That's one of, it's pretty strange. And one of the strangest parts of that disclosure was a $360 Uber trip. What really stood out to me, though, apart from all of these lavish expenses, was that 4 of the 5 MPs were sponsored by Canadians for Affordable Energy, an organization launched in 2016 by MP John Williamson. I don't think he's a liberal. You might want to check with him. The only exception was that Mr. Williamson, who was also on this trip, his travel was not covered by the organization that he had launched, but by the Danube Institute, which is a conservative think tank based in Hungary. So I'm just wondering, Madame Belanger, if you're aware of this story, and is this something that your office is looking into?
I'm aware of everything that's going on in the media. So we do have a team that goes through and looks at everything. And I can tell you that everything you see, we're on it. However, for every trip, for every sponsored travel, for every reception, for every gift that's out there, the first step is to verify if those groups that have donated are registered lobbyists. Otherwise, I don't regulate them. That's really all I can say with respect to anything that's on the work that we do on the compliance front.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I would love your insight. Would it have been inappropriate for Mr. Williamson to accept sponsored travel from an organization that he used to work for, one that he founded? And if it's not inappropriate according to the Act or the Code, do you think that it should be?
Okay. Again, and as I've repeated, many public office holders are calling my office. I don't regulate whether you can or cannot accept a gift. So that question can be asked to your next guests for the next hour. Whether or not that sponsored travel or that gift can be provided from a lobbyist, so that's the first step, then that comes to me. And right now, the only gift that can be provided is a $40 gift of a token of appreciation to say thank you for something that you have done, and $40 hospitality. So I am very strict on that with respect to registered lobbyists again. But whether the other side can accept that $40 gift or that $50 gift or $60 from whomever, registered lobbyists or not, that is for the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner to decide.
Do you think this is an issue of concern, though?
Well, the fact that it's in the media, I would say yes.
Now, I know that some of the most common examples of sponsored travel would be, for example, CIJA bringing MPs to Israel and Palestine, or the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office in Canada hosting trips to Taiwan. In this specific case that I outlined, we have a Hungarian think tank paying for a Canadian MP to go to the UK. Do you find that unusual?
Well, whether or not that gift could be accepted, again, would have to be asked from the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner's office, which is why the previous Conflict of Interest said there should be an acceptability test. Whether or not this group is registered to lobby, I don't know. And so, but I think that is this is happening on all fronts. And I think it needs to be regulated. Certainly from the lobbyist perspective, I'm regulating it.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Khalid. That's 5 minutes. Monsieur Villemure, 2 minutes et demie, s'il vous plaît.
Madame Ménard.
Thank you. Ms. Maynard, earlier you talked about a quasi-constitutional right and access to information. I know that the Privacy Commissioner had talked about a right to that. Would you say that access to information could be a fundamental right? Yes. Because without information, without our rights, without knowing what's happening in the government, we can't make democratic decisions, we can't vote, we can't understand what's going on with our government. The Supreme Court stated that it's part of freedom of expression. That's why we say it's quasi-constitutional. I think that it is not well understood, and I think that Canadians are realizing how essential information is in their decision-making and how they live, and yes, we could ask for it to be understood as a constitutional right. Would you agree that a lack of information leads to a lack of understanding? Well, when you're making a decision, you need to understand the facts. You need to understand what the decision is about. We can't make an informed decision without all the relevant information. So a lack of information could bring us to a lack of understanding or lead us to develop ideas, conspiracy theories. It could lead to many toxic results. I have about 30 seconds. Would you also say that a lack of information damages trust towards the government? Yes, absolutely. If one realizes afterwards that they didn't receive information quickly or that we didn't receive the right information, you can't trust that you'll get that information later. And so that's why I say that information needs to be given as quickly as possible and and it needs to be volunteered as well. Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's been some pretty significant concerns raised in the matter relating to the sponsored travel that I'd like to address through Commissioner Belanger about regulated and unregulated lobbying. If it's the case that a trip is funded a third party, vis-a-vis an interest that may be registered through individuals, what mechanisms do we have to pursue and investigate dark money funding of sponsored travel?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understood your question. From my perspective, if I know that a lobbyist who's registered that I regulate provides sponsored travel when prohibited, I can investigate and report to Parliament.
So who investigates in the unregulated compensation of MPs travel abroad?
There's a gap.
A gap?
Yeah.
It's the Wild West, essentially. It is what we're saying is that there's an incentive for big corporations or consultants to not register in order to not be adhering to the law. Because when you add up the numbers of this trip and you look at the ways in which consultancies operate, I have a hard time as a former consultant myself understanding how an individual can come up with the kind of cash to send people to a trip like this, to have the kind of expenses, $3,400 in champagne and wine and nearly $1,000 for steak, without there being some kind of fiduciary interest in that. So in that regard, if it's not regulated and, if it's not within the framework of lobbying, could that not be considered in the space of bribery?
Well, possibly, but what I would highly recommend is that when it comes to acceptability, public servants are not accepting these types of trips. It's really in relation to members of Parliament. And so if you believe that this needs to be regulated, maybe it's in the hands of the conflict of interest.
I'm going to ask you a direct question as my time is up.
Sorry.
Do you believe that dark money is an issue within Canada? Just a very short yes or no.
If I believe what? I didn't understand.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. At this point, I'm going to move a notice of motion because my time is elapsing, and I want to be clear on this. So I'm going to move a notice of motion at this point, sir.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Green.
Thank you. That pursuant to Standing Order 1083, and in relation to this recent disclosures of sponsored travel by Stephen Ellis, Rosemary Falk, Philip Lawrence, Shannon Stubbs, and John Williamson, which include more than $3,400 for champagne and wine and nearly $1,000 for steak dinners plus travel paid for by Canadians for Affordable Energy, that the committee invite the lobbying commissioner, the interim conflict of interest and ethics commissioner, and Dan McTeague, president of the Canadians for Affordable Energy, to appear before the committee for no less than one meeting. That's just a notice. So
Okay,
I want to
thank
make sure
you,
we put the committee on notice.
Thank you. If you can distribute that in both official languages to the clerk, I would appreciate that, Mr. Green. Thank you. We've got 2.5 minutes each. I do have a question for Ms. Belanger at the end, but Mr. Kirk, go ahead for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you to the commissioners for for coming and speaking with us today. Commissioner Maynard, you mentioned two things that I think are key here, and that's the quasi-constitutional right of access to information and the legal obligation that be fulfilled. And certainly, as we've spoken before, universal agreement from all that came to this testified before this committee on the importance of access to information. Unfortunately, one outlier when it came to whether or not the government's doing its job, and that happened to be the then minister. You said in your opening statements that government departments violate, and I believe you said these rules on a daily basis. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, the institutions are struggling in responding to the increased number of requests within the time limits provided by the Act. The Act says that the responses are supposed to be within 30 days. We see institutions such as the RCMP that is receiving more requests than they are able to respond to, so they are often missing that deadline. LAC is the same way, RCC. That timeline or deemed refusal is when you don't even receive a response. They're supposed to give you your response in 30 days or ask you for or tell you that they're going to take an extension. They don't do that.
So and specifically, I know when I've filed access to information requests, cabinet confidence is one of those boxes that you have to check. But certainly, it seems troubling that it seems to be the goodwill of a particular government, and if there was hypothetically something to hide, that it would just be easy to dismiss the importance of ensuring Canadians could have access to something like cabinet confidence and, of course, the revelations that we heard today. So I'm just wondering if you could provide comments on how we make sure that we can rebuild the trust in our access to information system. Among the challenges, I think, writ large erosion of trust that our government faces, to ensure that Canadians actually have that quasi-constitutional access to information that they deserve.
Sorry, in less than 20 seconds, please.
Public servants need to know that the information belongs to Canadian. So they're there to provide the information, not to hide it or not to redact it. So the first thing they need to do is change the culture of secrecy within the government so that information is shared.
Thank you. That was 19 seconds. I appreciate that. Go ahead, Madame Fortier, for 2 minutes et demi, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup et merci à vous deux pour...
Thank you, and thank you both for your service. We worked together over the last few years, and I know that you work very hard. I want to come back to what my colleague Ikra was saying on foreign entities. You mentioned that it might be good to regulate. Is that currently captured by the Act? And if not, how would we do that? How would we include those foreign entities? If they are represented by somebody who makes communication with a public office holder, they have to be registered. And if they register themselves, there are foreign entities that are a part of our registry because they communicate with public office holders and they meet the threshold of 30 hours a month. So some of them do a lot of lobbying. So for those who don't do a lot of lobbying and who don't have consultants, they don't have an obligation currently to be registered. But technically, foreign entities, foreign organizations that do lobbying do have an obligation to be registered. And I don't have a lot of time, but you've got about a year left in your mandate. If you had 3 priorities to share, would that be one of them? I only have one. Review the Lobbying Act. That is my own recommendation. And that could be a part of it. To focus on foreign entities, especially with sponsored travel. Yes, that would be a concrete example. Is there anything else that you would like to share with committee members in the few seconds that I have left? Well, for priorities, we'll continue to work very hard to improve clarity in our documents. We will improve engagement, but now that the code is up to date, all I have left to do is to share with you how to improve the lobbying regime at the federal level so that we can be leaders. Everyone is looking at us, and right now we're losing. We're not as good as we used to be. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Fortier.
Before we conclude with this hour's panel, Ms. Belanger, one of the concerns, we've seen a marked increase, as you've noted, in lobbying registry. One of the concerns that I've heard from some members is that their name appears on the lobbying registry without having to actually have met with the lobbyists. So how can we avoid that situation? Is it incumbent upon members to notify your office at that point to say, look, we didn't meet with these guys? And how, are there any penalties for those who do that within the lobbying community?
So please, if you do notice that, inform my office. We have a fantastic client service group, and they will communicate with the lobbyists. If I see a pattern, obviously sometimes it's a misunderstanding. They sent you a letter, and they thought that they had to do a monthly communication report. Please let us know if it's someone who repeats it as a way of amplifying their profile. I can investigate, and if it's inaccurate, I could send to the RCMP.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Belanger. Merci, Madame Maynard, aussi.
Thank you, Ms. Maynard, as well.
It's going to take some time to switch up, so I'm going to suspend the meeting for a couple of minutes, and then we should get started probably in another 5 minutes. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses for the second panel today. First, as an individual, Mr. Mario Dion, former Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. And from the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner, Mr. Conrad von Fichtenstein, Interim Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. Mr. Dion, I understand that you have a brief statement you'd like to make to the committee, so we'll start with you, sir. Go ahead, please. Thank you, and we appreciate you coming back to be before the committee. And just for the sake of the committee, the annual report is split between the former commissioner and the current commissioner, and that's why, in the absence of Mr. Dufresne today, I thought it was appropriate to have Mr. Dion come and speak to the committee as well. So welcome, sir. Go ahead, please.
C'est une situation un peu inusitée, en fait, Monsieur le Président.
It's an unusual situation. Thank you for welcoming me. I have been retired for about 8 months, and when you communicated with me last week, I agreed to come because I understand the immense role played by the House of Commons and committees. I'm here because the annual report that you want to talk about and other reports were prepared while I was still a commissioner. And so that is why I'm here today. And also because I worked with Mr. von Fichtenstein in the Justice Department a long time ago. And I thought it was unfair to expect him to study these different reports in depth, and so I accepted to be here today to assist him in responding to any questions that you might have for him.
For any question, any discussion you wish to have about my time as commissioner, 5 years altogether as the commissioner, and thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you, Mr. Dion. Mr. Interim Commissioner, the floor is yours for 5 minutes, sir. Go ahead,
Thank
please.
you for inviting me to appear before you today. I have a few opening remarks. Comme je souligne que nous sommes aujourd'hui réunis sur le territoire.
I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. The annual report for 2023, and I sent that to this committee. The interpreter would like to note that she cannot hear very well.
3 mandates.
Okay, excuse me, Mr.
Yes.
Commissioner. It was a similar problem we had last time with the interpreters not understanding. If you could just speak up and clearly into the microphone.
Yeah, bring me longer microphone with a longer.
I know we did that last time, but if you can speak up and clearly, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I shall try to speak right into the microphone. As you know, our office has 3 key activities: giving advice to public office holders, educating them so that they know when to recognize the public conflict of interest, and to address non-compliance issue. Transparency is a key issue for us. Tel que j'ai mentionné lors de ma comparution le 18 septembre, mon approche.
My approach was to be as transparent as possible in everything that the Commission does. And so I have 4 changes to share that were made to the implementation of the Act since my arrival. These are because of a pragmatic application of the Act.
Definition of entity. When you take post-employment with another entity, you have to have a cooling off period, or you have to ask me for shortening of the period. I don't think this makes any sense when you're going to the government. If you work for another department, or if you work as a consultant for another government, there's no conflict of interest, there's no confidential information you take with me. So in future, anybody who leaves one government post and goes to another in whatever function doesn't have to come and ask our permission. Secondly, it involves gifts. Under the gifts, under the Act, public office holders and their families are not allowed to accept any gifts or benefits. which could influence them. On the other hand, we also have the Commissioner of Lobbying, from whom we just heard, who makes rules regarding lobbyists, what they're allowed to give, the hospitality that they accept. The lobbyist has under their code established a value of $50 for each instance and not more than 200 cumulatively. It makes no sense to have different numbers in different regimes for both. So we will adopt a lobbyist for correction. Anything under $40 is fine. Cumulatively over 200 is fine too. Up to 200 is fine. If it's over 200, you have to explain it. Sorry. Notify us of it. Le troisième changement concerne que nous.
The last change has to be with the exception to the value of goods for public office holders and parliamentary secretaries and ministers. The Act requires that the Commissioner must believe that the assets do not pose any risk of conflict of interest, given their minimal value. What does that mean? About 10 years ago, we established it at $30,000. Things have changed. There's inflation, and so we've doubled that amount. And so if you're not a minister and you're not a parliamentary secretary, you can receive things of a value under $60,000.
Dozen individuals who are appointed under the Canada Energy Regulator Act. It affects those how they can deal with open-ended mutual funds and exchange-traded funds. In narrow opinion, legal opinion suggested that they can hold neither and they must sell them. I just don't understand how anybody who has open mutual funds can in any way be influenced by that, and why should he not own them? I know the wording of the Canada Energy Act is somewhat vague, and you can read it two ways, but I read it the way it was meant to be. We want to make sure that good people come and serve, etc. Whether they own mutual funds or not is irrelevant. But if it's ETFs, they have to either sell them or put them in a blind trust, but they don't have to sell them, which was the previous ruling. So these, hopefully, as a result of that, we will be able to attract capable people to the job of energy regulator. All of these changes are made with the same goal. Be practical, make sure we have a good exchange of people between public and private sector, but we avoid any conflict of interest. Thank you. I'll be glad to answer your questions.
Thank you, sir. We are going to start our first round, 6 minutes. Mr. Barrett, go ahead, please, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much both for being here. Mr. Dion, after 5 years in the position, is it your belief that the Liberal government takes the ethics rules seriously?
Mr. Chair, I would say that the government does take it seriously, although not as seriously as I wish it did. Seriousness is a spectrum of seriousness, if you wish. There were several ministers, parliamentary secretaries who were taking their obligation very seriously. There were others who were not as serious about it. But as a whole, there was a good degree of effort to ensure that they would act within the Conflict of Interest Act.
Based on your observations after 5 years, you made a recommendation for that government members should take remedial ethics training, and that implies a lack of understanding of the basics at the remedial level. Is that correct?
The word remedial was affixed to it by somebody else. I did not conceive of it as remedial. I conceived of it as I believe in education, I believe in continuous education, and I believe anybody can always learn more about a subject matter. And my opinion was that, and in the very busy world we live in, people sometimes choose not to take the time to properly understand their obligations. So that's why I made the recommendation a few months before I left. that they should take the time, they should learn how to better understand how to avoid trouble, essentially.
Do you recall in which publication or in which report that came out as a recommendation?
I think it's the Ng report, but I'm almost certain it's the Ng report. Yeah.
How many members of the Liberal government did you find guilty of breaking our ethics laws, our Ethics Act?
I never counted them, to tell you the truth. I've heard references to 4 or 5, but I never actually, recently, I don't know, but it's 4 or 5. Yeah.
Okay, so let's go through them. We had the Prime Minister in the Trudeau Report 1. That was with respect to the trip to Bell's Cay. We had
Report, not mine, but it's still still on the list.
we
Yeah.
had we're going to still count them as part of this government, even under the previous commissioner. Same Prime Minister. The Trudeau Report 2, which was with respect to the SNC Lavalin scandal, again. We had the then Fisheries Minister, I believe, Dominic LeBlanc, with the LeBlanc Report, clam scam, I think it was called. We had the Ng Report. That was the contract to a bestie of the small business minister, and then we had the Fergus Report. So we had five instances with 4 individuals, and though we covered 2 commissioners, we had.
You forgot to interrupt.
How could I forget?
Yeah.
Just like one might forget a French villa, I forgot the Morneau Report. Okay, well. Certainly, we've heard about all of the reports that have been issued under your tenure. I guess we'll see if any of that ethics training is taken up on, and if there's an arrest of the breaches of our ethics laws. What do you think the continued breaches of ethics laws did over your term to Canadians' confidence in our institution? Do you think that repeated offenses or multiple breaches by one government, that instills confidence in the system by Canadians?
It obviously doesn't. There's no other possible answer.
Why?
There's a cumulative effect, and it's taking place also around other situations, having in other spheres of political life, if you wish, which I think overall, the surveys are clear. Overall, the confidence has gone down.
When we see the erosion of Canadians' confidence, they would expect traditionally ministerial accountability. These are the people who are covered by the Act. It's ministers or parliamentary secretaries. But we've seen 2 cases where we've seen promotion one, of people who are named, who have reports named for them. Minister LeBlanc and Speaker Fergus have both received promotions, which I would say does not serve to bolster Canadians' confidence in their democratic institutions. After the Ng report, Minister Ng came before the committee and said that she lacked training. She lacked an understanding, and that's why she broke that ethics law. How much training do you think is required for someone who is elected to office and then is given a position that makes them a designated public office holder? How much training do you think is required for them to understand that giving a government contract to a friend would be unethical?
An hour would be sufficient to cover that particular topic.
Okay. How much time do I have left, Chair?
7 seconds.
Well, I thank you very much, Commissioners, for being here.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Barrett. We're now going to go to Ms. Khalid for 6 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. And if you don't mind, I'll go back to my questioning that I had in the first hour for our witnesses there. About the 5 MPs who had traveled to London on a very lavish trip that was sponsored by external entities. Now, as we discussed already, their flights, their hotels, the very oddly expensive Uber bills, and $6,000 dinners were paid for by Canadians for Affordable Energy, with an exception of MP John Williamson, who in 2016 founded that organization that paid for these MPs, his travel to London was paid for by a Hungarian think tank. So obviously a lot of questions arise with this. Do you think that this passes the sniff test, first and foremost, in terms of, like what an MP should logically be doing and be accepting?
Who are you directing?
I refer that to Mr. von Finkenstein, but also Monsieur Dion, if you have any comments.
First of all, you catch me unaware. I don't know anything about the situation that you're talking about. So I'm sorry, I cannot answer the question.
Okay, well, Monsieur Dion?
Nor do I. I frankly don't recall the trip you're talking about. I don't know what year it may have taken place in. It was published, I guess, in the sponsored travel list, published on March 31st.
It's also been quite in the media as well, so I'm actually quite surprised people of your stature and your offices would not know of something.
I've stopped reading those articles because sponsored travel are perfectly acceptable under the code. So that's what Parliament decided several years ago. So any criticism of sponsored travel it's a waste of time, because it's declared to be perfectly acceptable in the code governing the conduct of MPs. So that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So maybe I will recap it for you, and I would love for your input as to if this was a scenario that was presented to you, what would you think about it? So there's 5 Conservative MPs who took a lavish trip to London in June. The MPs on the trip were John Williamson, Stephen Ellis, Philip Lawrence, Rosemary Falk, and Shannon Stubbs. Included in their expenses were $600 bottles of champagne, porterhouse steaks, Chateaubriand smoked salmon, which cost over $6,200 for one night out for dinner. And the expenses also included a $360 Uber ride. Now, their expenses, their travel was paid for by an organization created by one of the MPs who was on this trip with them, except that specific MP's bills were paid by a Hungarian think tank. So when you see a scenario like that, based on your expertise and your experience in your offices, what would be some of the flags that would be raised by you?
Well, first of all, I don't answer hypothetical questions. Present me with facts and I'll make a ruling. Without that, I can't. Obviously, the way you present them and the way it would seem to smell. But as I say, it was your presentation. I don't know the actual fact, etc. But as my predecessor entitled, so rightly put it, the Act specifically allows for sponsored travel. And so therefore, if there's a situation, you have to compare the actual facts against the provisions of the law and make sure they have been complied with. And that's all I would, if this came up now, I would exactly do that. I would look at the facts and make sure that whatever provisions there are in the code that are pertinent to the situation have been complied with.
And I would add, Mr. Chair, that there is one other relevant consideration, is that the office only gets notified about sponsored travel way after the fact. So we are not consulted. We learn months and months after the trip has been completed, and we basically publish what was declared to us. We have no role in judging or in saying anything about sponsored travel, but to publish so that the political process can take over as it is now.
So I'm actually quite, I'm surprised that neither of you have heard of this, and that, that the facts that I presented are actually not hypothetical. They are real, and this would have been presented to you, in the case of sponsored travel. But I will leave that where it may. Maybe I'll ask you, what is your view on foreign entities providing dollars to Canadian members of Parliament to the level of extreme lavish trips, and its impact on our democracy here? I know we've had a whole bunch of conversations about foreign interference and the interference of foreign entities on Canadian democracy. I would love your viewpoint on that.
You know, obviously, like everybody else, I think that foreign actors playing on the Canadian scenes is something that shouldn't happen, and it should be restrained as much as we can. But I am bound to apply a law, and you can only look at that law and apply the powers that that law gives me and enforce those provisions. If you feel they're not strong enough, in which you're not alone, lots of people feel they obviously should be changed. But you know, at the moment, we have the provisions there, and we enforce them as much as we can. If you think they're not strong enough, then it's up to you as parliamentarians to make them better.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ms. Khalid. Prochaine intervention est pour Monsieur Villemure pour 6 minutes.
Next, we have Mr. Villemure for 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much to the witnesses for being with us. Mr. Dion, I've always appreciated your candor. When we talk about ethics, that is a good quality. Today, you published on your Twitter an article from the Toronto Star, and it says that the documents show that the RCMP did not carry out an investigation of Mr. Trudeau for SNC-Lavalin. I share that because I thought it was interesting, and it had to do with a situation that I was able to follow for years. That's all I wanted to do with that. That's fine. I just wanted to know, because you analyzed that situation. Yes, before producing the report, we examined the information that we had. And you noticed that the RCMP did not carry out an investigation. And today, a source has revealed the reasons. Are they reasonable? I don't have an opinion. Earlier, my colleague talked about shortcomings to the code. I believe that ethics are important, and we have the code, and it's important for culture. And some may be more inclined to follow the ethical code. But at the top of the pyramid, there seems to be a bit of a lack of ethics. Whereas people should be even more ethically aware at the top. What do you think? A leader has enormous influence on the people that they are leading. I saw that at the Department of Justice and everywhere where I worked. A leader's behavior is very important. It does play a role. And so, if a leader is less involved, that might have an impact on the rest of the pyramid. Yes, it is possible. Earlier, we asked how long it can take to learn something, and you said training of 1 hour. We were talking about the besties question earlier, and we're realizing that it's not enough, actually. I would like to ask you the question. We can always train people, but at some point there needs to be some good judgment here. There can be some improvements made, but if there's a lack of goodwill at the top, it contaminates the rest. Well, there are two issues there. There's education, comprehension, that allows a person to act and to be in compliance with the code and the act. But there are also consequences that would have an impact on people's behavior. It's like when we're crossing the street on a red light. If somebody gets a ticket, well, that will have an impact. So there's prevention through education, but there should also be some repercussions so that people understand. And we know that in the code, there aren't any sanctions beyond shame. In Trudeau Reports 1 and 2, I was shocked that there were 2 reports on a prime minister. And so one would expect great behavior from a prime minister. Could there be sanctions? You forget that there was also Trudeau 3. We talked a lot about sanctions when I was commissioner. I think that there should be a review of what the commissioner could recommend. The commissioner cannot impose sanctions. But recommending sanctions could exert a real pressure on the Prime Minister, who makes the final decision, and the House of Commons as well. In this case, the Prime Minister is judge of his own report, basically. And that was not taken into account in 2006. When you say that a commissioner could recommend sanctions, what do you have in mind? Well, a suspension, for example. It could be a fine, not prison necessarily. We'd have to see if the criminal code would apply in a very serious situation. So yeah, maybe fines and suspension. Or mandatory training, as is done with harassment and other training. For a fine, I often think that ethics can be bought in that case. But thank you very much. Thank you, Monsieur Villemur. Under time, even.
We're going to go to Mr. Green now for 6 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Green.
Thank you very much. Commissioner von Winckenstein, in your opening remarks, you talked about the discrepancy for gifts as it related to the two bodies, one at 50 and one at 200. And you mentioned that you'd make an adjustment on the gifts. Is that correct?
That we can obviously adopt the appropriate amount. It seems to me it makes no sense that you have a different amount for donors and donees. So therefore, you know what?
I would agree. I would agree. And in your opinion, the lower of the thresholds is probably the more reasonable?
Well, you know, just can somebody be bought for $40? I doubt it. Will it influence him? I doubt it. Or 200, etc. How far do you have to go before you think it becomes meaningful? That's why I think this is, you know, being prudent and setting it at this level. It certainly will not influence anybody.
And I think you acknowledge that the protection of a democratic institution as it relates to the trust and the decisions that are made, that having a conflict, having the appearance of a conflict, being influenced, the conversation certainly that we've had, I know that you would be privy to around foreign interference as being germane. And yet the order of magnitude in which the scenario in which was provided to you, $3,400 for champagne and wine, I think one of them might have been a $700 bottle of wine. If let's just, I know you don't want to do hypotheticals, but let's have an ethical exercise right now. If I was to receive in my office from an unregistered company consultant a $800 bottle of champagne, could I accept that under the current regime?
No, you have to report it.
So if I was flown first class to the UK and put up in a hotel and an $800 bottle of champagne was presented to me there, could I accept it?
You know, you're pointing out that there could be an improvement to our code and the way it is worded, etc. The way it is worded right now, as Mario so eloquently pointed out to you, sponsored travel is allowed, and it's just reported to us, and we publish it later on. So,
Mr. Dion, if I could now through to you and reclaim my time. Thank you, sir. Mr. Dion, in your time in office, you've certainly, you know, been very candid and I think extremely professional and impartial in carrying out the legislation as it's written to the best of your ability. Did you ever cover in any of your work the phenomenon of dark money, sir? The idea that actors behind the scenes can use proxies to engage in activities that they themselves might not legally be able to engage in. Are you familiar with the term dark money, sir?
No, frankly, I'm not. I have a sense of what it could be, but I have not come across that situation.
Okay, dark money would look like potentially a company who might be registered and therefore not allowed to provide gifts to MPs contracting a third party. So in essence, doing indirectly what it can't do directly, providing a third party with the funding mechanisms to fly a group of MPs across the transatlantic to London for an upscale, conference that included $3,400 in champagne and $1,000 steak dinners. If it were the case, sir, that a company or an entity was funding something indirectly through consultants, how would you frame that? Would that be a violation of the Conflict of Interest Code, or could it be considered perhaps a criminal act?
I'll have to say what, it's complex and hypothetical, and therefore I will resist the temptation.
Really. I mean, it's so you wanted to
Making certain assumptions which have to be proven. I use the indirectly. What proof do you have?
Okay.
And if you can prove that, etc., and then if you do, then you're starting to wander into criminal fields. So, without the exact situation, the exact fact, I don't think either Mario or I can give you a satisfactory answer.
That's fair. I'll accept that. Let me ask a question from perhaps a different perspective. If a company who is unregistered to be on the lobbyist and therefore in this nebulous dark space of unregulated gifts, travel, and luxuries, would the onus be on them to prove that they could actually afford to send a group of MPs on a transatlantic trip? Or is this are we now reporting to the public that really the lobbyist registry doesn't matter, the gift registry doesn't matter, because all we have to do potentially is hire a third party who's unregistered?
And the sponsored travel is fine by definition under the code. So therefore, it doesn't matter who the donor is, because it's perfectly okay to be sponsored and to go on a trip. And anything that's incidental to the trip is also perfectly acceptable under the code.
Okay, so basically fly to the Caribbean to get the gifts and it's okay. Or London.
It doesn't matter who gives the gift. The MPs are authorized to accept sponsored travel, period. From any entity.
Let me just ask you this last question then. If I'm in Hamilton and someone sponsors me to travel to downtown Toronto to stay in the Fairmont, and I'm at a conference in the Fairmont in Toronto, and we have an $800 bottle of champagne, is that sponsored travel?
You go away a few kilometers away, it is sponsored travel. There is no definition. Travel means you're not at your usual place of residence, period.
Okay, thank you,
And
Mr.
somebody
Green.
pays for your trip to
the
go
Canadian
there.
public as it is to me.
Thank you
very much, sir.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Mr.
your time.
Green. Thank you, Mr. Dion. We're going to go to the second round now. 5 minutes for Mr. Couric. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, and Mr. Dion, former Commissioner. It's certainly been a very interesting conversation, and I think that we've talked a lot about trust and leadership, and there's been some questions about that attitude coming from the top. So I'd ask both of you for your feedback on the implications of when violations of the code, as was mentioned. In fact, Mr. Dion, you mentioned, there's been 3 Trudeau reports. It's not 1, it's not 2, but it's 3. So the implications that Canadians seem to see a prime minister continually, or in this case, at least on 3 occasions, violate the Conflict of Interest Code or be subject to a pretty serious investigative process. The challenges that leads to Canadians to be able to trust when it seems like there's no consequences. Mr. Dion, I'll start with you, and then I'd like your feedback as well from Commissioner Finkelstein. Hopefully I said that correctly.
I would point out that there are no immediate consequences. There could very well be consequences of another nature, basically. So that's why the reports, we investigate, we come to a conclusion, we send the report to the Prime Minister, and we publish immediately after, so that the public can see for himself the report, what the findings were, what happened, and so on and so forth. So then another process can take place. And it does in the House of Commons or in the media and so on and so forth. It's out of our court. The minute the commissioner tables a report, it's over. The commissioner, for what it's worth, has come to a conclusion, as he's required to do under the Act, and then it's up to other people to pick it up from there. That's good.
Thank you. Anything to add, Commissioner?
I think you're looking at it slightly from the wrong perspective. The whole system is set up on the basis of reputation. You have a reputation, you want to preserve, etc. If you do something that is against the code and there's a report, it is damaging to your reputation, no question about it. It will be made public and it's there. You'd have to take the consequences. The voter has to take the consequences, whether he loses confidence in you, in your government, or whatever. Our job is just to make sure that people do abide by the code, and when there is a violation or failure, so it is made public so that the political process can take the consequences. It's not for us to take the consequences.
So I appreciate that, and here's why I appreciate that feedback, because it gets passed to Parliament. But when you have, for example, a governing party that seems to continually allow those within their leadership to be flagrantly disregard ethics, or in the case of now Speaker Fergus, have been found to have violated the code and then get a seemingly pretty big promotion with a chauffeur driver and a residence. So I'm curious, and a question to both of you. How do we reconcile this when it seems like those that are making the decisions, the naming and shaming, it seems to not be enough to actually help restore some of the trust that's been broken with Canadians when it comes to the ethics rules in this country? Mr. Dion, I'll start with you.
I think my colleague has answered clearly. Affects the reputation. It follows you forever on Google. And I would point out, although it's not my role, that Mr. Fergus was elected. He was not promoted by the Prime Minister. So.
Yeah. Well, it certainly elected, and it's funny that some of these conversations didn't happen. So I guess the question is, maybe a change in government would help bring about an adjustment in that attitude and help restore trust in Canadians. Commissioner Finkelstein, just to clarify, you did mention in your opening statement that exemptions being granted to people subject to the Act working between governments. Now, is that different government departments within the federal government? Is that different governments, provincial, municipal? Is that foreign? Can you just outline that a little bit?
I mean, if this right now the situation was, for instance, let's say you worked for the Department of Transport and you're an associate deputy minister, you leave and you want to work for the Department of Agriculture as a consultant or a Crown Corporation, etc. You have a 2-year cooling off period, 1 year depending on your rank, and you have to come to me and ask, can I shorten that? Is this I don't see why. I don't see where the conflict is. I don't see where the ethical problem is. It's you. Whatever knowledge you have is government knowledge. You take it from one end of the government to the other. Go ahead, do it. I don't want to see it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Kirk. Mr. Baines, 5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our two commissioners for joining us here today. Mr. Finkelstein, when you appeared before us last month, you indicated that the backlog amount was trivial and that you will ensure that'll be gone. So I just wanted to see where we're at now. Can you please share any overview?
There's no backlog anymore.
It's gone?
Gone.
Okay. Congratulations. Thank you. On the annual report that states that in 2022-2023, the Commissioner continued to implement its 3-year strategic plan covering 2021 to 2024, and the plan is not posted on the website. So what are the highlights of the plan that you can maybe share?
Are you talking to me? Or?
Yes, sorry, Mr. Same to yourself.
You know, strategic plan, basically the strategic plan outline the pure goals that the organization wants to follow over those 4 years or 5 years it was, both in terms of in education, in terms of information, in terms of using the most up-to-date tools to be user-friendly, both for the people who use the system, and also in terms of setting internal goals and outlines so that service standards, so that things are get done in a proper fashion in a proper time frame. So it's called strategic plan. It's really not so much strategic because, after all, what we are charged with administrating the code and the law. It sets out how we want to do it, how we want to do it most efficiently, most user-friendly, and as unproblematic as possible.
And is it done in phases or processes that you've timed out, like this year and then the following year?
Yeah, well, there's certain things are ongoing. For instance, a perfect example is bringing in a new and better informatics system. First of all, we can't do it ourselves because we're part of the House of Commons, so we have to work with them, etc. So it has to be something that's compatible with their system, etc. It has to be approved by them. And then, as you know, there are lots of stories of doing it wrong and disastrously. So we are trying to do it in sort of phases. And you do it, first of all, you test the system, then you make sure you educate your people, they understand it, there's no human resistance to it. And then you do it in phases, because if you do it all at once, you're guaranteed to have a breakdown or something. So there are always some practical problems that have to be tested, and wrinkles have to be worked out before you go full bore.
And then you mentioned training people, like retraining. Is that time taking a little bit?
Yeah. I think that's having seen introductions of new technology several times over my career. That I think is the most important part. Is the people training, that they understand it, they can feel comfortable with it, and they overcome the internal resistance that we all have to change. Oh, I already did this way. Why do I have to do it this way? Explain it, learn how to do it, and see what the advantages are, etc.
Are you finding there's a culture change that you're
there's also a bit of a culture change. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, both on September 18th and today, I think it's clear that it's not just an application of the act and mechanically making sure that everything's, but keep the overall purpose in mind. What are we trying to do? We're trying to avoid conflict of interest. We're trying to restore trust in the system, and we also make it workable. And let's, it's sometimes the explanation that the question I was just asked about government, moving from one government to another government. A perfect example of something. It's just annoying to people. It doesn't. So, because if you look at the end result, what is the conflict? What is the ethical problem? There is none. Okay, then let's not do it.
Okay, and I'll just go to Mr. Dion. The annual report states that in 2022 and 2023, 83% of reporting public office holders submitted the information required by the initial compliance process on time. And there were more than 1,400 items for all regulators posted in the public registry, everything from declaration of assets, etc. Are these numbers consistent, or do you think this has improved or gotten worse over the years?
Very short answer, please.
They fluctuate from time to time, but nothing marked, no marked change. And 83% did it on time, 17% didn't, and it's pretty common.
Yeah. Okay, merci. Thank you. Monsieur Villemure, 2 minutes et demi, s'il vous plaît. Commencez.
Thank you very much. I have 2.5 minutes. In your view, considering what we were saying earlier with the tone at the top, would you be able to say if there's a culture of ethics at the higher levels of government? I think so. I think that the work started a long time ago with the Tate report from 97-ish. A lot of time was spent on the training of deputy ministers. Assistant deputy ministers were much better than we were, but there's still work to be done. And it can never be perfect. So, we could say that the culture is relatively ethical, even though there are a few shortcomings. Yes, and as in all groups, there can be some bad apples. Thank you. Now that you can speak freely, what recommendations would you make beyond the code to improve the level of ethics in the government? Perhaps an obligation to respond to a report of the office. As is the case with access to information, the government has to respond in 90 days or 5 months. I don't remember what the timeline is, but there could be the same thing for the ethics commissioner's reports on any shortcomings, that the government will have to respond and say whether or not they accept the recommendations or not. We weren't receiving any feedback. We talked about sanctions, feedback, because currently there is no obligation for that now. I hadn't seen it that way, but you said the code was not created for the top of the pyramid to be judging the top of the pyramid. What could we do? We're in an unforeseen situation. It's the case in many fields. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Monsieur Villemur.
Mr. Green for 2.5 minutes. Go ahead, Matt.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dion, in carrying on with that, I think it's very important that any regime, particularly ones that are, I don't want to say quasi-judicial, but certainly fundamental to the democratic institutions that we serve. And I think the point that you raised about the obligation to participate in the process, to cooperate in the process is an important one. What could you point to as being, the strongest of recommendations to ensure adherence to that? Because it seems like there is no deterrence and there is no downside to the government not cooperating with your investigations.
No, I don't. If you heard that I said we did not get cooperation, I don't know where it comes from, because we did consistently receive good cooperation from those who were under investigation throughout my 5 years. There's no question about that. So it's not about cooperation. It's about what happens after the conclusion has been reached and the report is published, the absence of feedback, the absence of visible consequences. Maybe there are important consequences that we don't see, we don't know about. It's not impossible. But that's what I think undermines the credibility of the regime. After the report is tabled, poof, there is trouble for a few hours or a few days, and then it's over, it's finished, it disappears. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, maybe perhaps on my end something got lost in my interpretation or my understanding of what was said. But I think the spirit is there, which is ultimately what happens after you've concluded the report. So perhaps could you reflect on comparators, given your experience in public service, for jurisdictions around the world which does have a higher level of compliance to orders that are made? In terms of penalties or some type of accountability measures.
We did a review of this nature while I was there, and I think we provided the predecessor committee, or maybe this, I'm not sure which legislature it was, but we did give this committee a table of various jurisdictions and various consequences. And I must admit I have forgotten. It's not cut and clear, cut and dry, as you say in English. It varies greatly between jurisdictions. But there's one universal reality. He who investigates does not impose penalties. It's somebody else who has to read the conclusion and decide whether there should be any consequences, and if so, what it should be.
Very important testimony today. Thank you for taking time to be here and support this committee. And to the Commissioner, Mr. Von Finkelstein, thank you again for your candor and the straightness in your answers. I appreciate you both.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Green. We're going to go for 2.5 minutes. Conservatives, followed by the Liberals to conclude this panel. Mr. Couric, your mom and dad are here. I'm willing to give you 2.5 minutes. Or do we? Monsieur Gord. Okay. Jacques.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. La question va être pour vous, Monsieur Dion.
My question will be for you, Monsieur Dion. You talked about that there are some people that take ethics very seriously, some who take it a lot less seriously. I would call that a bit of an elastic ethics. You had a lengthy career, 7 years? I left after 5 years for health reasons. Is there a profile of a person that would have a bit more of an elastic ethics. There are different personality types. Some people are very organized and some are not. Some people succeeded in doing whatever they wanted for their whole lives without any consequences. And there are some who have taken things very seriously. Even for me, from the first grade, I was terrified of doing anything wrong. And there are people who don't follow the rules, never do. And so there are different personalities. But when we look at ministers and other people, in general, they're quite responsible people. We're talking about a minority of 5-10% that might be a little bit more elastic, as you said. You published reports that were well written, and do you feel frustrated that after all that work, there are no consequences? It's talked about in the media for 2-3 days and then it's forgotten. Well, we need to accept that our role is limited, and I knew that I couldn't make decisions for the Prime Minister. So, a bit of frustration in the hours after tabling, but after that it's fine. Well, after all the money invested at the office, well, there are consequences, but it's something that happens in the long and medium term. We'll let democracy do its work. Thank you, Mr. Dion.
Merci, Mr. Gourde. Madame.
Thank you, Mr. Gould. Madame Fortier, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you for being with us. And I can say that I had the privilege, when I was minister, to have great collaboration with your teams. You have very hardworking team members, and I would like to thank you for that good work. Mr. Van Finkenstein, I think the last time you were here, you mentioned that you had the resources that you needed for your mandate. Is that still the case? And if yes, what will your priorities be for the coming months? And if no, can you explain what you'll do? We don't have a resource issue. They're adequate for what we're trying to do. My priorities, as I stated, are to have an implementation of the Act that is focused on the goal to avoid conflicts of interest and to apply it practically. It's not like taxes. The implementation of the Act requires some judgment. We need to examine the situation and look at the impact and see how it can be applied and maintain the trust of the public in the public service. I believe that it's essential. We cannot lose sight of the overall objective. I don't have a lot of time, but my colleague talked about a case, and information of that about that case was shared today. Do you have any concerns, anything that you would like to investigate more closely? I can only do what the Act and what the Code allow me to do. Do I like the situation that you mentioned? No. But again, I don't know the details. It's the first time that I'm hearing about what your colleague mentioned. It's certainly not going to help in maintaining the public's trust. Could the government do something? There's almost nothing that we can do. Thank you, Ms. Fortier.
For being in front of the committee today. To the interim commissioner, thank you again for your frankness and your candor, Mr. Dion. I'm not sure whether we will see you again in front of this committee, but we do wish you all the best, and thank you for your years of service to the people of Canada, and we wish you great health and happiness in retirement, sir. So thank you for being here. Just a couple of things before we go. First of all, the foreign interference report that was completed by the committee is expected to be tabled on Thursday morning during routine proceedings to Parliament. Now, as per the motion that was passed by the committee, we will be having a media conference. So we are going to need to know who is going to be available from each party for this media conference that we are planning on scheduling for Thursday. Okay, so if you can have that into the clerk by noon tomorrow, the availability of members for the Thursday media conference, I would appreciate that.
Do you know around what time?
We're working on the time right now. So, Madam Clerk, any idea, rough?
After routine.
Yeah, so it'll be after routine for sure. We just have to firm up a time, okay? So if you can let us know by noon tomorrow which representatives from each party will be available for that. Other than that, that's all that I have for today. Thank you to our clerk, our analysts, and our technical people who support us in these meetings. This meeting is adjourned. Have a good evening, everyone.